evening, good midnight to my people out there in the world. Welcome. Welcome to Soul Medicine Sanctuary, a soft landing place for those in search of total liberation from within. You feel what I'm putting down? How was your day? I'm going to tell you a little bit about my day, and then I'm going to tell you about Black Sacred Futurity's core functionality, rebuilding the Black self. So today I went to New Haven and I was navigating a lot of feelings of like isolation, to be real raw. And also there's like the pull, right? You know, some things sometimes like the one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? Like sometimes you could be in a place and you could be giving a lot of energy and or hope to it. I'm still waiting for people to get in here so I know like you don't be telling me. I think the numbers be off, but oh yeah. Sometimes we give a lot to a place or we have a lot of high hopes for a place and it's just not pulling us, you know, and then there's another place that like is very, very unknown. You know, it's like you don't know what's gonna happen there, but it's like pulling you, and it's been pulling you for like years, right? So we're thinking about leaning in to that fear of that thing that you want to do, need to do, but you're anxious about what it requires you to do, right? How it requires you to show up in order for you to, yeah, it's a leap, it's an upgrade, it is a graduation, especially from being invisible to being visible, right? Let's talk about the visibility wound. Hi, family. Welcome to the chat. Let's talk about the visibility wound. Let's talk about isolation. Let's talk about family, connection, community. Kyra asked a very interesting question. Okay, I have thoughts on that. I have thoughts on that. I'm gonna come back to that in a few breaths. Let's take a few deep breaths. Can we do that? I'm gonna put my diatomaceous earth down. Oh, I have my lazuli, which is my favorite color and my favorite stone. It's very good for the throat chakra to open up ooh, your freedom to speak your heart. Not just speak your mind, speak your heart. We're gonna place the lapis on the heart. If you have a lapis, feel free to place it on the heart. Welcome, welcome, family. I'm seeing all of you in the chat. Oh, let's just take a few breaths to center ourselves back. Deep inhale, hold it, slow exhale. That's the only time I'm gonna guide you because I gotta do it for myself too. You know what I mean? So just breathe with me. Get your mind in order. Okay, so I was talking about the visibility when I was talking about New Haven. I was talking about isolation. I was talking about being pulled elsewhere, right? And the navigation of the fear of difference and the unknown, which all of us tend to engage with at different times in our lives, right? And so this work here, me showing up here with y'all is part of that jumping in to that unknown in terms of what's next for myself, for my daughter, for the world, for Nora Labs, right? Portal X. So if you've been following me for a while, you probably know about Portal X. If you're new here, welcome to the family. I'll tell you a little bit about it. But ultimately, Portal X is the tool, and Nora Labs is the map, right? Like, Nora Labs helps us to reconnect with ourselves, find out who we are, connect with the value within us, the light within us, in a number of different ways, through a number of different inputs and exercises and implementations and strategies and collaborations and partnerships. Right? So we give you the map. This is how you get to the liberated, new world. Right? This is how we see the map, according to the legends who have come before us, the Garveys and the Malcolms and the Du Boises and the Fanons and the Asada Shakurs and the Fubilayo Ransom Kutis and the Herbert Macaulays, like all the people that came before us have been doing this work. We do not have the right to take it for granted. So that means that each of us has to find our contribution and make that contribution, make that our high priority, our highest priority, really, because what they sacrificed was about our survival, was about our freedom to exist. Like, when we're thinking about healing Black trauma, like, this is some of the stuff that we are navigating on a cellular level. Spirit is talking, because I'm sitting here like, who is what? Okay, educate me. Cellular level, we have the memory. We know about Joy. Let me get her last name pronunciation right. Joy DeGruy, post-traumatic stress syndrome, dealing with Black people and how we embody the trauma of our ancestors, and we also embody the joy of our ancestors, right? Everything is about trauma, right? We embody the joy of our lineage, the power, the beauty, the strength, the glory of our lineage. All this Christian talk and prayer about, like, destroying whatever your ancestors did is insane. Like, it's not healthy, okay? Because if they were to balance that with gratitude for the good things that the ancestors did, because if the ancestors didn't do anything right, you wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. We would not exist. So if everything the ancestors gave us needs to be blood of Jesus, you're literally cutting yourself off from your own biological and spiritual lineage. And there is a harm in that. There's a psychological harm. Fanon is coming to mind. Du Bois is coming to mind. So I came on here to talk about rebuilding the Black self, right? And so this landing that we just landed on is, we're thinking about the severing of the Black soul from the Black being, the Black self, the severing. And so that anti-ancestry nonsense is a big part of how we sever our bloodline energetically. So we become disconnected from our actual source of life, right? Like, we can get in touch and appreciate and get hype about all of the good things about the divine infinity and the source of our breath and our life, right? But if your ancestors did not exist, you would not exist. If they didn't do anything right, you would not exist. So when we talk about ancestor veneration, it's not as much about, like, I have an ancestor altar. I have to, like, I've gone periods in my life without it, and I've always come back to feeling like I needed it, and it's been very helpful for me. Very, very helpful for me for getting back in touch with myself, to reconnecting with my identity, to knowing who I am. It's been very helpful. And so somebody wants to curse that and put the blood of Jesus on it. To me, that is a form of insanity, especially because that idea obviously came from the source that was also stealing your land and killing your people, right? So the filter through which the Christian scriptures, the Bible, the texts come is very significant for how we receive the information. So that source that says to you, your ancestors are no good. They're putting that program in the back of your mind and your subconscious. Ancestors are no good. You gotta like cancel every deal and every I'm sure that some people do have bad ancestors who did like some treacherous shit. Like obviously, evil happened, so some of us are related to those evil people, right? It doesn't mean that we only have that option in terms of our identity or our existence or our, movement in the world. So, the ancestor veneration is at minimum learning their names, just knowing who you come from. This is a key part of rebuilding the Black self after empire. Who do you come from? What can you find out? How much of your consciousness can be embodied, emboldened with the presence of the lineage from which you come? How much of your consciousness can contain and hold the memory, the biological memory, the spiritual memory, the linguistic memory, the genetic memory? How much of your consciousness is encoded with, focused on the energy and presence and mindfulness of your ancestors, of your bloodline, of your lineage, of your community? If you live in Africa, and you don't overconsume Western content, then you're going to be very fortunate in that department, because your consciousness will, at minimum, be filled with people who look like you and reminders of your lineage and where you came from. But now, when you are transplanted out of your land of origin, we're talking about a different thing. So this is where Fanon, Du Bois, and Shiombola, myself, come in to talk about the consciousness. Right? I'm still learning about how to articulate this in the literature, so I'm going to do my best to download and also reference, cite some sources that I have been looking into recently, and make it make sense. Okay, so the idea is that we have a split consciousness as Black people in a world ruled by oppressors. You have your actual true self, and then you have the self that is a creation, a generation for security and safety. The self that is meant to protect you from the evil that you have become accustomed to experiencing in your DNA for the most part. I would say this applies to the majority of Black people. Obviously, there are people who have been exempt from the evil one way or the other. Maybe they've been super fortunate spiritually. Maybe they benefited from the harm. I don't know. But, when you cause the harm, that is its own form of psychological and biological trauma, right? So we have a split consciousness. And so the first, I think there's some early, one early Black scholar that Du Bois may have touched on, but we know about Du Bois and the double consciousness, right? We know that the Black person in the U.S., right, in the corporation of the United States, the Black person who lives on that stolen land is experiencing the double consciousness from the perspective of, here's my true self that I get to access from time to time, and here is the self that I believe the enemy sees me as, the enemy who makes me feel threatened at all times, right? The enemy who has activated my DNA and put me in a sort of perpetual state of fear. The enemy that has had me in fear for so long that fear has become my subconscious program. I have forgotten how afraid that I am. Am I making sense to somebody? So the split consciousness is you wrestling with the identities that you actually are and you have to be to survive, right? And so there is a harm in that, right? We always talk about being whole, right? We talk about spirituality, the divine. Everybody's working towards wholeness, peace, joy, rest, abundance, right? Restitution, resources, right? Aren't we all working towards that alignment and that peace? Isn't that why we seek some sort of divine connection to get assistance in that regard? So if we're all working towards alignment, peace, rest, trust, joy, how can we police the unharmful means, the heart-led means that help us to get there? How can we attack each other and kill each other over our pursuit of peace? Does that make any sense? So the people who actually believe in the divine and worship the divine from any language, from any direction, are being slaughtered by the people who pretend to have any relationship with the divine. So my particular contribution, this is why we're talking about spiritual futurism, Black sacred futurity. My contribution is the spiritual, is the center, right? Liberation is a God thing. I don't see a sustainable path to liberation that is not centered on our metaphysical power, our, I don't know what's coming up, our just power, our just, like, this default, but we have been so separated from it. Again, true self, external self, constructed self, protective self, right? We have that magic, and it's that magic that they don't want us to find out about. They are terrified. When I tell you they are terrified about the possibility of you finding out your superpowers and being able to actually use them and make a living from them, and thus you don't even have to plug into their matrix, it becomes irrelevant to you. That is their worst nightmare. And so you tapping into your superpowers is very much a matter of knowing who you are, because your liberated self is an identity. It is a form of you. It is a form of yourself. It is a cloak you may put on. It is a light you may unlock, right? Your liberated self is an identity that you are aiming to embody. You are aiming to get to an experience of that liberated self. But the question is, how much, right? For most of us, how much are we desperate for that liberated embodiment, that liberated existence, experience? I was reminded of a Yoruba term this week. If you know the terms of the tones, please correct me, right? But we're aspiring to a liberated experience, and we're looking for anything that will give us that. And we just need help. We just need to walk each other home. Help us all get to the North Star. Why would there be any other desire? So when we embody that form of evolution, of liberation, of freedom, then we get to experience liberation at all times, no matter what is happening around us. And we get to influence our environment for the benefit of all. Because intention, intention creates the reaction, right? Intention is what determines what we experience. You following me? So let's set an intention right quick. We're going to set an intention that more and more of my knowledge about my lineage be revealed to me with speed. With more understanding about my lineage, I receive the memory of everyone who came before me. I receive the memory of everyone who came before me. I receive peace. I receive gratitude. I receive rest. I receive joy. I receive belief, gratitude, favor, trust, conviction, expectation of good. I receive trust. I receive rest. Okay, so let's go down the checklist right quick. Let's see what else we are intending to cover. I'm going to just list off some names of scholars who've written on rebuilding the Black self or some level of this sort of like Black psychology, Black spiritual liberation, Black liberation theology, right? Howard Thurman is a favorite. James Cone is a favorite. Gutierrez, who is the father of liberation theology as we know it today. Paulo Freire, right? We're going to talk about Dr. Umar as well. Sylvia Winter, especially through Fanon sociogeny, I don't know how to pronounce that. Use her for the human itself has been misdefined by Western man. Liberation requires reinventing what it means to be human. Did you hear that? Sylvia Winter. Liberation means reinventing what it means to be human. And I don't know that we have to really reinvent it, or if it's just that we remember what it was before the interruption. Again, when we center them in our history, we think that our definition, our value, that our like we see them as having concretized our existence, which means that we don't remember ourselves before them. But when we see them as an interruption to the long, eternal history, it's a different story. We can't even put them on the kind of pedestal that they need us to put them on in order to rule us the way that they do. Let me go some milk. There's just a dash of milk left. Okay, thank you, Father. Thank you, Mother. Thank you, community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your energy. I appreciate it. I'm going to say a few prayers for you, especially those who you may not know your bloodline history. You may not know a lot. You know very little. I think this is, again, where spiritual comes in, because if you set up an ancestor altar, it is a place where you can pray for the reconnection. You can pray for the memory. You can pray for the sentient experience of it. The experiencing of a liberated infinity in which you are communal and communing with your bloodline at all times, no matter how far removed. And now, of course, ultimately we're all related, right? You do all the mapping, all all the people on the planet are related one way or the other, because you have to come from somebody, right? Anyway, I pray that the Most High will reveal to you your secret knowledge, hidden places. God, help us to know your secret knowledge of hidden places that will liberate us. Help us to know our bloodline. Help us to know our lineage and appreciate the DNA that constitutes our body and our existence. Thank you for helping us to appreciate our hair textures that came from this specific ancestor, that specific ancestor, our teeth, our hands, our arms, our eyes, our smile, our laugh, our dietary inclinations. Mother, Most High, Mother us now. Give us the truth of our bloodline, Hashem. Help us to feel you in our physical, in our physiological instance. So for anybody out there for whom it's a huge mystery who their people are, where they come from, I just ask you to just shine a light, help them to see some things, help them to find some things, help them to find them, some news, some information, some insights, some richness that will empower them and energize them and lift them up towards a deeper knowing of you as they feel you in your body, in your blood, in their presence. Okay, my fam. So, Patricia Hill Collins, Barbara A. Holmes, these are some of the thinkers that we're going to be talking about. Frantz Fanon, obviously, I mentioned before, W.E.B. Du Bois. Let me see if I have an outline up here. So, what I kind of want to move through to wrap up is just kind of like what I mean by liberating yourself from within, rebuilding the Black Self, right? Because of the bombardment of nonsense from the empire, we have allowed our psyches to be filled with their imagination, their intention, their hopes, their expectations. We have allowed our psyche, our subconscious, our body, our somatic experience to be enveloped in their imagination, their consciousness, their desires, their dreams, because they are the ones who filter the information that we predominantly receive. No matter how woke we are, the means of production, y'all heard me talk about that before, right? So listen, if and when we own the means of production, we get to then dictate how and when we liberate ourselves. We get to dictate what information we receive. And we get to dictate how useful the information we receive, the tools that we use are for our own liberation, for the realization of our own dreams and expectations and hopes and aspirations. Our own heaven, like Daddy Malcolm said. Okay, so when we talk about rebuilding the Black Self, this is an energetic endeavor, literally the energy in your body, sending the right messages to it. And it is an institutional endeavor. The self as the institution and the self, the mirroring of our individual identities with the communities and institutions that support us from without. We're going to be talking about anarchism. I used to think anarchy was about chaos. It's not. Shout out to Dr. Toyin Ajao. I believe she's a doctor. Yeah. So, thank you for the love, family. It's been good to see you guys. Yeah, so both Fanon and Du Bois basically circle the same thing of the double consciousness, except that Du Bois was focused on the experience in the Black, Western world, Black America primarily, whereas Fanon was looking more at the colonial environment, like the freshly colonial environment in Africa. And I think Fanon was from the Caribbean, right? So he had opinions there. He was francophone, right? So we know about Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, Black Skin, White Mass. Like, these are the kind of books you loan to people that you never get back. So I feel like I've owned a few copies of these. And yeah, as I rebuild my library, that's another piece that's going to be really central. Those texts of Fanon, just really sitting with them and meditating on them. We think about revolutionary scripture, liturgies of liberation. We got to think about Fanon. We got to think about Sheikh Anta Diop. We got to think about Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Assata Shakur. The list. I always bring up Funmilayo Ransom Kuti, and I really want to get a lot more of the Black women's names, from that like 30s, 40s, 50s period. Of course, you have Zora Neale Hurston, part of the Harlem Renaissance. Toni Morrison is later, right? Like, these are liturgies of liberation. And so when we think about meditation, spirituality, prayer, text, scriptures, we have to think about what makes us feel worthy, what makes us feel human, what makes us feel valuable and valued. Why would we give our attention and energy to things that don't give us that? Right? And because the empire says this is what it means to be educated, these are the texts that you need to know, these are the authors, these are the minds that you need to know about in order to be educated. But the liberated world, the liberated soul says, who am I? And what can I find in the world to help me unlock that power and that identity and the power of that identity in my core? How can I be given the opportunities? How can I access the opportunities to unlock the value that is within me at the highest possible level? So, Du Bois, early 1900s, Souls of Black Folk. I have some of his books here. Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro, right? Like Amos Wilson, all these thinkers that grappled with the questions of how do we liberate our minds? Who are we? What's wrong with us? How are we staying in this position? What is it that's causing us to stay in this position? How do we get out of this downtrodden position? This social death, like Orlando Patterson called it globally. The Black people, the darker the skin, the worse the conditions of living, right? So, rebuilding the Black Self takes what Du Bois uncovered, what Fanon discovered and discussed, what all the Black thinkers who have been engaging with our psychology, in between them and beyond them, after them, what all these people thought about rebuilding the Black Self, right? And there are so many contexts that we can point to in which we can see work that gave us clues, hints, direction. Some was very explicit in terms of how you rebuild a liberated Black Self after empire, right? Because the empire's goal is to keep you separated, is to keep you split in consciousness, is to keep you afraid and separated from yourself, right? That's what the empire needs in order to steal the land beneath your feet. That's what the empire needs to pump you full of drugs that you have to be on for the rest of your life, right? That's what the empire needs to make you look away while they start wars in your territory. You gotta have your split consciousness. So I took Du Bois's Double Consciousness myself and Ola Williams, Dr. Ola Williams, I believe, right? He has probably 4 Ivy League degrees. So he was the subject of my film, my master's, that kind of illustrated my master's thesis at Yale. The film is called Hyphenated. It's on Noir Press YouTube page, I believe. So in this short film, this short, documentary, he's talking about his experience with his father and the question of identity and being a black man in PG County, Baltimore area, and being raised with Jamaicans and Black Americans and other Black folks and other people of color and of course some white folks, being raised in that context and knowing that you are Black but not knowing much else about your identity until later, right? High school, college, etc. And so he talked about how in college that was the first time that he became conscious of this whole like, oh, he's Nigerian, he's supposed to like embody a Nigerian identity, right? Because before that, he saw himself really as African American, right? And so if you take Du Bois's double consciousness, the Black person, the Black man in America, his internal self and his external self, and then you take the phenon of the colonial self, right? Because the colonized Black man who's coming to the West is adding a layer of consciousness, right? Because he has to interface with the Black American, which, with which there's a gap, a cultural gap, right? A cultural distance. And so there is tension there. And then he's interfacing with the white American or those who are ascribed white, right? And how they are engaging with, like what that tension is like. So he has a triple consciousness, right? We have a triple consciousness as African immigrants in America, African immigrants in the UK, right? African immigrants in Japan, in Asia, right? Like anywhere we are, where the majority do not look like us, one, where we have to interact with, a solid block of people of a completely different cultural background and experience, we will experience some form of a triple consciousness, right? Some are more severe than others, depending on the context. But when you have to see yourself, like each consciousness, each perspective that you have to see yourself through, particularly for your survival. Right? It's one thing to just kind of like, I'm curious how these people, no, it's another thing when you realize that your safety, um, your safety, your security, your economic access, your educational access, your cultural, social access depends on how you are seen, how you are ascribed, right? So today I was talking about my day a little earlier, being in New Haven. And so I went to this grocery store. It used to be Elm City Market, which was one of my favorite places. I know it was controversial, but it was one of my favorite places to go because they had some of the best selections of like natural food in New Haven, right? Very fresh, very like nourishing stuff, and really, well seasoned, well made, tasted good, and but they were very expensive. So it was not a place you could go too often, right? But they did have some things that were a little bit on the fairer or cheaper side. So I used to go there all the time, and I would be downtown, I'd be in Make Haven, I'd be, working at the library, whatever. I would go to Elm City Market, right? And they were replaced by a store, and it was really abrupt and sudden, and nobody really knew what was going on. But they were replaced with a store over time that is another grocery store, but it's not a health food center. It's just, everything, right? And when it first came, of course, for me, there was a lot of disappointment because it's like, I want my Elm City Market back. But the new owners, they had their own, obviously their own goals, so they were not focused on the health food and whatever. And I realized after my first visit there that the place was Chinese owned or Asian owned. I believe the paper said it was Chinese owned, but I could be wrong. But let's at least say it's East Asian owned. And I said, okay, I may come back if if I'm desperate for something. But usually I'm eating a pretty healthy diet, so if they don't have health food options, it's not really worth me going to the store. And so anyway, today I went back there, right, on my little like foray downtown, and I didn't remember when I first went in that it was Asian owned. I just went in because I was like, I'm curious what their selection is like now. Let's see if they have anything I would need, right? And so yeah, as I'm walking the aisles, I'm like, okay, I'm seeing a couple of things that I'd be interested in possibly, right? So I'm picking them up, and then I remember that this store is Asian owned, and I'm like, oh, I'm not even supposed to be in here, right? I was feeling bad about like, oh, am I gonna shop with them? But I realized like the mandate is to not even be in their establishments, right? Because if they can accuse someone of a crime that has not been committed, and they can take the law into their own hands to punish that person of the crime of which they have accused them, then those people are not safe around them, right? If they're, especially if they're profiling people, if they're doing it to people of a certain race, you're not safe in these places, right? And if the community is not speaking out, if the Asian community is not saying like, hey, we are not with that, we support Black people, we support Black Lives Matter, blah blah blah. Like when the Asians are coming out and saying that, then you know that okay, there's a higher likelihood that I'd be safe with this person, I'd be safe in their business. But if people are quiet and the only thing they have to say is how dare you boycott us, then it indicates that there isn't much love for you as a Black consumer. There's no expression of a commitment that I've been made aware of, and all the commentary that I've heard. There's no expression of a commitment to like keep Black people safe, to work harder as a community, to like, work on perceptions and behaviors, right? And so the idea of boycotting them is less about the economics of it, it's more about the safety of it. If we're made to feel unsafe in their establishments, why would we go there if we have a choice? Right? But I'm bringing this up because I thought about it as an example of where the triple consciousness plays, where the triple consciousness shows up, right? Because when I realized, when it came to me or dawned on me that I wasn't supposed to even be in there, I was remembering the why, right? I was remembering that it was about the question of safety. Because if these people see me as a criminal, if they accuse me of a crime, then what? Right? And what can I do that would stop them from doing that other than say my prayers? Right? And so I remember thinking, like, well, at least I look nice. So they're probably less likely to think that I would, rob or whatever. But that's all I have. I don't have any sense that, oh, the police are going to look out for me or, the other shoppers, maybe. New Haveners are generally progressive, right? Um, but I don't know that for a fact unless this person expressly demonstrates that in their cultural behavior, in their messaging, in their language, in the way that they treat me. And I'll tell you one thing: the two interactions I've had with Asians since I've been made aware of the blackout, they have been, more friendly to me than I've usually experienced. And I don't seek out Asians or anything. I don't have any issue with them, but I don't have a lot of memories. There are some Asians like I went to grad school with that were very supportive. Shout out to Ellen Sue. Um, and I can think through some more names, right? But I met a lot of great East Asians at Yale for sure, and I had some East Asian friends in childhood that were really sweet to me, right? So I don't have this sense of like, oh, all East Asians are bad. However, if we're consistently having these experiences in your establishments, then you are the one who is responsible for correcting them. It's not us, right? Because if you cannot prove that everybody you have harassed is an actual criminal, has committed an actual crime, then you are in the wrong if you are policing them and violating their personal space and following them and making them feel like criminals. Because if I come to your establishment and you make me feel like a criminal, I'm leaving. Why would I want to be there if I respect myself? But y'all expect us not to respect ourselves. All right, I'm sorry, I should be addressing my community, but I'm just like, if the Asian people see this, know that we respect ourselves and know that the cloak is being removed, the veil. That's part of what the boys talked about, the veil, right? That veil between your real self and your external self, the veil through which you have to switch your perspective, right? So I'm walking through the store and I'm thinking about how the Asians may see me, how the owners may see me, would they perceive me as a threat, right? And as a Nigerian, as a Yoruba woman, grew up in the US with a Nigerian passport, people would call me Nigerian American because of my accent and my history. I don't claim this country. They don't claim me. So, So, as a Nigerian who was raised here, who has been embedded in the Black American community for extended periods of time, who has been embedded in very, very global, diverse communities, who has been embedded in like white communities, right? I have had the experience of the reperception, like the practice of perceiving myself through other people's eyes constantly, right? And for me, it's really interesting to think about how those perspectives get concentrated in the people who raise us, right? Like we inherit our perspectives on other people. We always see these images about how kids are not racist, right? Because nobody, if nobody teaches you how to be racist, you're not going to just be racist out the womb necessarily, right? So, but based on what they are exposed to, based on what their environment says and does, like what is done in their environment, this is what will determine their perspectives on other people, right? And so even their perspectives on themselves, right? So this is the key part about rebuilding the self, and we're talking about closing that gap, right? Becoming whole, becoming one with yourself, and not just the different pieces of yourself that you have to be to survive at different times. When we look at the voices of our parents, the voices of our ancestors, the voices of our history, we think then about how would they perceive me? How do they perceive me? How would they perceive this decision or what I'm doing right now? Right? And that is a different sort of consciousness. I don't know what the psychological term is for that. I'm sure there probably is one. But, the way that we see ourselves through our parents, through our lineage, versus the way we see ourselves through other races, institutions. You understand what I'm saying? So all of these things have to be reconciled when we decide that we are going to inhabit our body fully as a soul, right? When we decide that we're going to be who we are in every way. And we're not going to hide any aspect of ourselves. We're not going to limit any bit of ourselves. We're going to fully tap into the magic that we have, right? We're going to use that superpower that's going to terrify the empire. When we decide that, the practice of being in touch with that core self becomes an act of survival. It's liberation, right? It's liberation or death of the soul, right? Because you tap into that true self, that true version of you, that core identity. The liberated identity is your core identity. When you tap into your core identity and you live in that, then you are free, right? And it's a process for getting there. And so I used myself, my body, my life, my psyche as a site of surgery, soul surgery, spirit surgery, rebuilding of myself. And so my goal with this series and with much of my work and my writing is to help articulate, especially now, how I have been rebuilding myself, what I have been using, what I have been doing, what what has cost me, what I have, fought through and lost, and, the challenges that I've had in that. But what it has looked like to rebuild the self from the core identity, from the soul, to say, this is who I truly am. And I'm proud of this. You that ain't stop fronting on yourself. You get because you need your help. Phone blowing up, getting tired of yourself. Game on lock, pick and choose your clientele. Hey, you that stop fronting on yourself. You get that you need your help. Phone blowing up, getting tired of yourself. Game on lock, pick and choose your clientele. Hey, y'all ain't ready. Okay, so how do you get to that point where you just like, bruh, thank God for making me the way that you made me. I am so wonderful. I'm so wonderful. I'm so blessed. I'm so lucky. I'm so fortunate. I'm such a blessing to my generation. I'm such a blessing to this timeline, right? When do you get to that point where you feel that way about yourself inherently at all times? And you don't think about it through the lens of like society's, social scores, your social credit number. How do you look to the other people? Do you like yourself? Do you love yourself? Like, are you really like, man, I want to hang out with her. I want to spend time with her. She's awesome. Do you feel that way about yourself? Because if we're going to ask people to treat us as if we deserve to be in the room, then we got to treat ourselves that way, right? So, rebuilding the Black self after Empire. So I talked about the triple consciousness. I have a paper that I wrote at Yale. I didn't submit it to any journals. I'm trying to decide what I want to do about that. Maybe I'll do a second part and submit them together. But the idea is what I'm getting at is we have a very split consciousness in the Western world, especially as, soul beings, right? People who are really in touch with and seeking to be in touch with our souls. And so we need, I'm losing my train of thought, but we need the support, we need the space, we need the opportunity to tap into the soul, to pay attention to the soul, to recognize the soul. And when living in a timeline such as this, that sort of opportunity is not freely given, right? So when we come back to the heart, the soul, the mind of the gut, right? The subconscious, the Holy Spirit, when we come back to that awareness, every time we come back to the awareness of the truth, the divine, we shed another layer of the deceptive perception of ourselves, right? So I was talking about multiple consciousness, infinite consciousnesses. Yeah, and so it's coming back to the heart, to the self, that allows us to shed those consciousnesses, those different perspectives, right? Because it's not to say that nobody else's voice will matter. It's just that they won't come near the importance of your own perception, your own voice. And if you're doing this from a place of devotion to the divine, then it becomes very pure and holy, right? And it becomes very truthful. So you begin to know that what you're tapping into is valuable and valid, right? So triple consciousness, infinite consciousness, and then it looks like we're basically, articulating my practice of diagnosing these problems, assessing myself, healing myself, reteaching myself, reprogramming myself, rewiring myself, right? Like really remembering who I truly am and being at rest with that, like permanently, right? In any context, before anyone. And not having to pretend for anyone, not having to convince anyone of anything, which is literally like, this is who I am, take it or leave it, right? And not doing that from a place of like fear of rejection, but just a place of like, it don't matter because I'm so down with me that I'm just gonna be down with me, right? And so the expensive part, one of the most painful parts of rebuilding the liberated self after empire is what you lose, the people that you lose, the experiences that you lose, the vibrations that you lose. Some of it, of course, you need to lose it to get free, but at least for a time, but you're so attached to it. It's so recognizable. It's so familiar. Why do you gotta leave it behind? It's hard to leave these things behind. So it can be a very lonely road when you're doing this. But again, when you can find others who are doing this work and you build community with them, with us. This is what Soul Medicine Sanctuary is about. Who's doing the work? Who's doing the 21 days to liberated habits? Who's praying? Who's meditating? Who's stretching? Who's doing yoga, moving, taking walks? Who wants to talk about it? Who wants to meditate together? Who wants to pray together? Who wants to expect the best together? Right? There's another 21 days to liberated habit cycle coming up soon, I'm sure. This is what the type of community that can truly liberate us. This is what that kind of type of community does, is to come together and say, what is the practice? What are the habits that we need? What is the mindset that we experience this dream future that we've been manifesting all these generations, right? How do we do that internally, even individually, when nobody's looking, we just need the medicine? How do we do it collectively as a community to reinforce the habit, the flow, the energy, the default mechanism, the algorithm? How do we come together to reinforce the algorithm and recharge it so that it becomes effortless? That we do the things, we practice the rituals that heal us, that take care of us, that help us take care of ourselves, that help us to be stronger as families, as communities, as countries, African nations. Hello? Okay, so I've listed off some of the different things that I've done, and I'll get more details into that, but I really just want to touch on the thinker. So Bell Hooks, All About Love, we're going to talk about that. I think I requested that book, or I'm looking for it on one of my libraries online. I mentioned James Cone, I mentioned Howard Thurman, Paulo Freire, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Decolonizing the Mind, very, very important one. Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, right? These thinkers, these writers help us to reclaim the identity of who we are and say it matters, it's valuable, it's valid. We're coming from a very far place where we were told that we were not even human. So we have to remember the work that it took to get us here. So, okay, and so one key piece, I don't know if I touched on this before, one key piece of my distinction in terms of my work is I know that every generation has to fight our own fight, right? This is what we've been saying for infinite years, right? And so for me, growing up exposed to this movement history, I asked the question, okay, every time you come up against or you learn about a movement, you ask, why did it end? How did it end? What was the cause of the failure, the rupture, or whatever? Why was this person assassinated? Right? Why did the Black Panthers dissolve? Right? What happened? And when you pay attention to all the different ways that the virus comes in to steal, kill, and destroy, to divide and conquer, to separate, then you recognize that the key thing is to prevent that access. And the virus is a spiritual element. It's not a physical element only. And so this is why when I looked at all these histories, I said, people have to be on the same accord. They got to be on the same vibration. You can't get liberated with people who don't believe in freedom, who don't want to be good, who don't know what it is to be good. You got to be on the same vibration. How do you get on the same vibration? You got to get liberated there, spiritually, intuitively, internally. Your infinite well. Your cloud of peace, your well of peace, whatever it is, your nirvana inside of yourself. Howard Thurman had a term, I gotta go back and look for it, but that place of rest within yourself, you gotta be able to find that. You gotta be able to find that, and from there you get all the infinite wisdom and all the downloads, all the strategies and all the visions and all the plans. So I'm going to read something that was processed in my research here. Fanon gave us the psychology of colonialism. Du Bois gave us the phenomenology of double consciousness. I gave us the triple consciousness, me and Ola Williams. Black Faith Sacred Futurity asks, what practices allow a human being to become psychologically, spiritually, and somatically free after empire? Black Sacred Futurity asks, what practices allow a human to become psychologically, spiritually, and somatically free after empire? What gets us free, nigga? What makes it actually happen and stay that way so that we don't have to keep fighting every generation? That has been the question I've been answering in many different ways for the last decade plus. Longer than a decade, much longer. So, in looking at Black Sacred Futurity and looking at rebuilding the Black self, the question is, where are you split and why? Who split you? And what are the gaps? And how do you bring these identities in conversation with each other? How do you bring them into the same room? How do they get to coexist in order to negotiate a path back to your true self? How do you get to live the life you've always wanted as the identity that is truly you, and do it safely, securely, abundantly, economically thriving in community, how do you get to make that happen, no matter where you are in the world? That's what we're going to be working on. So I have, I've been over my time for some time, and I'm grateful that we got to spend this time. I think we did some breaths, so I'm just going to say a prayer. Mother, Father, creator of the universe, El Elyon. You are the one, El Elyon, beginning and creator of all. All that exists is with your permission. Give thanks for your breath. I praise your existence. I offer to you my entirety. Take hold and mold and recreate me in your image by your fire. Deep belief in me will wire. New conviction, please inspire. Purify me, make me wiser. Call my heart to your desires. In your word, my heart is lighter. You are the one, El Elyon. So much to talk about. All right. I cover you in the blood of Yeshua, the water of Yemujah, and the light of the universe, the light of the divine, whatever it is that you believe in, I cover you in that. I pray that you are at peace. I pray that you have rest. I pray that you have trust in your divine and in yourself. I pray that you find the God within, that you radiate more of the God within today than you did yesterday, tomorrow than the day before. I pray that you continually move closer to the divine consciousness, divine embodiment that is free for you, that is liberating for you, that liberates you from within, that gives you rest and trust and peace in your being and your body, in alignment with who you are at your core. I pray that God help you to emerge as your liberated self, that liberated self becomes dominant, radiates from within you until it dominates your existence and just becomes who you are. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Let's go, Jesus. See y'all. I'll see you